we are very pleased to have with us someone who is quite an expert in the field of energy efficiency. Please join me in welcoming Glenn Cannon.
Let me tell you a little bit about my background. I went to Clemson University. For those of you not familiar with Clemson, they beat South Carolina last weekend. I went to the Navy. I was a Navy pilot for 6 years. And I got out of the Navy and I went and worked for Santee Cooper in South Carolina, which is a state-owned electric utility. It's an old WPA project that was primarily for flood control, and they had a side business of some hydroelectric generation. And now they serve in about 2/3 of the state of South Carolina. So we have retail area, and I worked out of Myrtle Beach office for a number of years. I spent about 13 years at Santee Cooper, and what my job was when I left there was a manager of marketing. And what that really meant was, back in the old days, we used to teach people how to use electric appliances. We had a kitchen in our office where we'd bring in new stoves and refrigerators and all that sort of thing, and then microwaves came along. So we'd teach people to do that. It was all about selling electricity, and that was the history of it. In fact, some of the energy conservation programs that we use today, roots trace back to the old days of selling electricity. So that's kind of what my background was there. In 1990, I got a job offer to go to Iowa to manage a small municipal utility, and I did that and spent 17 years there, and I retired sort of at the end of last year. So that's kind of my story. As Elizabeth mentioned, I did serve as chairman of American Public Power Association, which is a national trade association for about 2,000 electric utilities. The year I was chair, my message was that we needed to be more environmentally responsible. And I did a presentation that was called Energy Efficiency and Ethics, and why utilities should do that. And I've weaved a little bit of that in here, so that's kind of where things started for me. 30 years in the business, I can tell you I've never seen time like it is today for the utility industry. And this presentation is designed for electric utilities. If you're not an electric utility, that's fine. If you're an electric utility customer, you'll be okay. So I'll try and explain some of the, if I get too far with terms or anything, just stop me and say, what are you talking about? But we've always had some issues with NIMBY, which everybody knows. My buddy in Florida now says things have evolved to banana, which is built absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And I've come up with my own, which is NOP. It's not on my planet. So we've seen a real shift. I can tell you this. I've talked to customers who remember the old days before electricity, and they tell the utility, you build a line across my property, you want it right away, fine, I'll just give it to you. There was no problem at all because they wanted power. But those days have really changed. What I show them is some of the efforts that are going on today. And this might be a little bit hard to read, but it says, don't get burned, looking at a coal-fired power plant in the background. And what's interesting about this is not that it's a publication coming out against coal plants, it's who's doing it. It's the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. And in Iowa, we actually had a group that was called Interfaith Power and Light. And their mission was to advocate for reduced greenhouse gases, lower carbon emissions by opposing new coal-fired power plants. So that's a real challenge. They came to our church, and we sat through a program where everybody was given a sheet of paper and you calculate your carbon footprint based on how many miles you drove and how big your house was and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of that stuff going on. At the same time, let's go back a little bit in history. In the 20th century, what was the greatest engineering achievement in the 20th century? You got a pretty heady list there of possibilities, right? Well, according to the National Academy of Engineering, it was really the electrification of the United States as the single biggest change. Now, why would they pick that if you think about the grid? Well, you got to go back. You're talking 1900 and 2000. In 1900, the average lifespan was 47. In the year 2000, it's 76. At the same time, the United States population increased by 200 million people. So you think about those numbers really starting to grow. In 1900, the three leading causes of death were pneumonia, tuberculosis, and diarrhea. Not exactly a pretty picture. So what changed in 2000? It's heart disease, stroke, and cancer. And what made the difference? Yeah, there were a lot of advances in medical technology, but the single biggest difference was refrigeration, food safety. And that really accounted for people's health improving dramatically. So electric utility, electrification of the United States, not only did that, but there was some huge advances. Largest GDP in the world, it's all tied to electricity. And at the same time, you got to kind of keep things in perspective when you're talking about our energy use in the U.S. is comparing us to the rest of the world. 1/3 of the world's population doesn't even have access to electricity. There's no way they can compete in the global economy. In fact, I tell people if I was a recruiter for a terrorist organization, that's where I'd go. These people are disaffected. They almost have no hope because their economies are not vibrant, and that would be a good recruiting ground. So electricity is a foundation of our economy, and it's also, in my opinion, a public good. And we'll talk a little bit about that. This is our friend Ken Lane from Enron. I know it doesn't sound very big today, but at the time, it was the largest bankruptcy in history, and it was all about electricity deregulation. And when this thing came up, I was in the business hospital. No, you don't want to do that. Everybody say, oh yeah, it'll drive prices down, and everybody's going to do it. So well, wait, these guys are talking about making money. They're going to make more money, and the utilities are going to make more money, and the customers are going to save money. I said, well, it worked. It's impossible. You can't do all of those things. The worst critter in the world is an unregulated monopoly. You don't want one of those. So we see that his understudy, Jeff Skilling, is now serving a 43-year sentence. So I think I was right in that debate. Some of the other challenges that the utility industry is facing today is the demand is growing. Regardless of how much conservation is preached, the reality is the average residential customer is using more electricity every year. It just keeps on growing. We looked at our housing stock. Go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s and look at the size of the house, average size of the new home. And then look today. We were building houses in Waverly, and I've seen some driving around here that are not 1,200, 1,500 square feet. They're 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 square foot homes. So it takes a considerable amount more energy doing that. At the same time, my wife and I have friends in Waverly built a new house. It has more dishwashers, more refrigerators, and more vehicle parking places than there are people living in the house. But they can afford it, so they think that's right. The other thing that's affecting utilities is rising utility bills, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. Increasing generation costs, all sources of fuel are going up. It's kind of like the coal guys will look at the oil. So wait a minute, if they're getting $140 a barrel, we want more. Or gas is, wait a minute, we're kind of competing with those guys, so we want more. So kind of everything goes up. Reliability is a huge issue for industrial customers. I tell the story about our largest customer in Waverly was a Nestle plant. They made carnation hot cocoa mix. When you're having hot chocolate this winter, it's coming from Waverly, Iowa, so you can think about them. 30-second outage there costs them more in dollars than an entire month's utility bill. So outages are really bad. We served an insurance company that if their power went down, they had a trading floor for National Credit Union Association. Anybody that was buying stocks or bonds on the market were going through that desk, and the Securities and Exchange Commission would fine them if they couldn't make trades. They had to be operating 24 hours a day. Carbon risk. There's all kind of problems associated with carbon. there's the fear or expectation that there's going to be a cap and trade on emissions, if not some type of carbon tax or carbon restriction. And then there's huge generation and transmission investments that need to be made for a number of different reasons. One of them is reliability, the other one is trying to move renewables. And the government, through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, is experimenting with things called RTOs, regional transmission organizations, that were supposed to make these open market, make transactions easier and more transparent. And what they've done is about triple the cost. So all of these experiments aren't working very well, so the poor utility manager is faced with all of this stuff every day. So that was kind of the good, bad, and the ugly. That was the good part. Now we're getting to the ugly part. The electric utility industry is responsible for 80% of the air pollution and more than 88% of greenhouse gas emissions, and more environmental damage than any other human activity. So it's not fun to be in the business if you're dirty. So let's go back and look at our consumption in the United States, and we compare ourselves to the rest of the world. You can see that the USA versus the world average there is pretty high. There are a few countries that have higher usage on a per capita basis, but a number of those are actually have some geothermal resources that do a lot of heating with electricity that we normally don't do. At the same time, remember, we're talking about looking at the world's top GDP producer, so there are some ties with that. I like to fish. I call this the fish hook. This is what we found in Waverly. We found some old records, old utility bills back to 1917, and then we found some of the 30s, 50s, 80s. And what we did is we took those bills and we figured out what the average cost per kilowatt hour was that we were charging customers. And customers complained about rate increases all the time. It didn't matter when it was. They're going to, anytime you had a rate increase, customers didn't like that. But what we did is we took those rates and we put them all in 2008 dollars. So this is on the same scale. So what we found out is that actually over history, Waverly was like the entire U.S. utility industry in taking advantage of cost of scales, large power plants, driving those costs down. The real cost of energy hadn't done anything but go down until about the year 2000. And now it's like, wait a minute, lights came on, the party's over, and in terms of real dollars, the price is actually going up. And my prediction is it's going to look like a U by the time we get done, if not worse. So we're seeing that in terms of real dollars, utilities are facing. At the same time, remember that customers are using more. So you're getting a real increase in bills, and there's a lot of pressure coming from that, which is actually, when you think about energy efficiency, is actually good news. There's another issue that's going on that's related to utilities, greenhouse gases, and this comes from, this is a chart that shows natural catastrophes and their rate of occurrence over from about 1950 through 2005. And this comes from a company called Munich Re. This is a reinsurance company who's actually an insurance company to insurance companies. And what they're saying is that, well, all the causes to geophysical things like earthquakes, volcanoes, all that stuff, about the same. Weather-related natural catastrophes are on a pretty steep incline. And they say, well, wait a minute, if that's true, then what are the economic losses associated with that? And they've got another chart showing that same time period. They're saying the losses to the insurance industry during that same time period. Anybody's got homeowner insurance, this is not really news. You probably noticed it's going up. Well, these guys are not in business to lose money, so they're going to increase their costs, and along with that, your insurance company is. So there's an engineering firm called Black & Veatch that does a lot of work for the utility industry, and they did a survey last year, and they said, well, you know, what's on the minds of the utility executives? So this goes out to probably about 800 utility executives around the country, and they say, well, the environment is kind of like, it's number 3 on their radar screen. And 82% believe that global warming is occurring, which is actually good news. And 72% believe there's going to be some kind of carbon legislation here in the next few years. What else are they thinking? They're thinking, wait a minute, I got a lot of enviro people after me, and you know, people are picking on me. There's actually been 11 gigawatts of generation. A big chunk of that's coming out of Texas, but coal plants have actually been put on the back burner in the last few years. And 50% actually think that their organizations are publicly acknowledging that climate change is a man-made. Now this is a huge issue. If you'd gone back a couple of years ago, it'd probably been maybe 1 or 2%. So there is a lot of increase in awareness. And 86% of them claim that they've adequately positioned themselves to be environmentally aware. Now I think that's probably open for debate. A lot of people don't think they are, but a lot of them think they're doing what they need to do. And I guess they're not going to know unless they get any feedback. Now, back to the ethics part. If you're part of that survey and you say, yeah, we recognize that we're part of the problem. We're a big part of that problem. We've also been given this monopoly. Monopoly means that I don't have any competition. I'm the only game in town. Along with that, shouldn't moral responsibility come with that? In my opinion, it does. I think utility, by the sheer fact that they are a monopoly, have a moral obligation to help their customers use the products, services that they provide in the most environmentally efficient manner possible. They also need to educate customers. They do a good job and have done a good job until now, but they really don't. And part of it is, when you go to the meter is kind of the dividing line between customers and the utility. Most states have, for these monopolies, what's called an obligation to serve. The utility is required in this service territory, any customer that wants service, to bring the service to them, whatever rules and regulations they have for connecting them up. But they can connect them up. Customer use power for whatever they want. Utility has absolutely no say in that, how much you use or when. They can design rates, they have to be approved, but that was kind of the dividing line. And what I'm trying to advocate to utilities now is that you need to actually get on the other side of the meter. They are a resource, just like coal, gas, nuclear, wind, geothermal, whatever, your resource. And actually, it's a cheaper resource than all of those. So part of that, and I'll tell you this, part of the message that I talk to utilities about, if you've got increasing costs and you've got environmental concerns, somebody's going to do something. You have, as a utility, the absolute best opportunity in the world. You have a great deal of credibility with your customers. People trust you. You've been around for a long time. Nobody can go into a customer base easier than that local utility and try to help them with energy efficiency today. If they don't do it, somebody from the outside is going to come in and they're going to make the utility out to be the bad guy. And that's not good. So the smart utilities are going to do it. So a key part of the solution in all these things is energy efficiency. Environmental, we can look at lower carbon issues if we have aggressive energy efficiency. Lower water use, that may not be a problem in Kentucky, but I can tell you when you get on the other side of the Mississippi River, water is a huge issue. And all these thermal plants take vast amounts of water, and people fight real vigorously about that. Economics, you can help your customers save money, lower your cost, downward pressure on the resources, on the coal and gas. Actually, one of the biggest problems the utilities have in the last few years is not so much coal, the price of coal going up, is trains, the transportation for coal. It's a huge, huge problem. Then you got local economy issues. If your customer saves $1 and they spend that in local economy, it's actually a great economic development tool. And then we've got a whole other problem here with low income. How do we deal with that? Well, what better way than make them energy efficient? So utility system benefits are both in the short term. They can do a number of things. They've got lower base load. They can lower the peak demand. You can target energy efficiency programs to do those things, and they can be modular and manageable, whichever ones you pick. It also helps for utilities risk management program. So what is this energy efficiency stuff and what's the cost? Again, the benefits are long-term permanent reductions in use. Once you build an energy efficient home, it's not going to increase the usage for heating and cooling because those things are built in there. You can actually predict the size of it, and my experience has been in 30 years of working with customers, the ones that have the energy efficient homes with the properly sized heating and cooling system actually have more comfortable homes, and that's also a benefit. It's reliable. Energy efficiency is very reliable. I get asked a question about utilities about demand control programs where they're going to control your air conditioner or your water heater, and I don't like those programs. And the reason I don't like them is you're telling your customer not to use the product and service that you're providing when they most need it. Let's be smarter about it and have a more energy efficient home, one with a properly sized heating and cooling system. There are ways to control that growth. Let's talk a little bit about the growth. This is something that most people don't talk about. And I've been a part of a couple of task forces, and I raised this. Whoa, time out. We're predicting load growth out here, and we want to cut back on emissions, but we're looking at where we are today. What about the other 100 million people that we're projected to add in the United States by 2050? Are they not going to want to drive or have a house and have air conditioning and those sorts of things, flat screen TV? Where's that power going to come from? If we can't do pretty aggressive conservation, then that even complicates and adds to the growth program. As I mentioned, we have a lot of experience. Energy efficiency programs can be integrated in what's called integrated resource planning. Integrated resource planning, where the utility says, okay, here's the forecast, how do we get there? And they can look at every option that's available, and they look at the cost, benefits, disadvantages of each one of those programs to make their decision. Most states have some form of integrated resource planning they're required, some don't, but it's a very good business plan for utility. As we talked a little bit about, you can target energy efficiency programs for any class of customers, industrial, commercial, residential, or even low income. It helps looking at other utilities. There's some utilities that have a very long time or long-term programs have been in place, very successful, and their customers are saving 10, 20, 30% or more in their programs. This is kind of the bottom line for Waverly Light Power. We had a whole long list of energy efficiency programs. And what we did is, when we first started doing it, we had to talk to our board, say, okay, we want to do these programs, and they're going to be cost effective for the utility. It's going to take time. The first year it's not going to be that way. Second year it's not going to be that way. You got to build. These things got to build on themselves. For example, when you introduce a new program, not everybody's going to jump out and go along with it. It takes time to build up relations with home builders, heating and air contractors, plumbers, all the trade allies out there. So it takes a few years. So we started our programs back in the early 90s, very aggressive programs, and you can see that our cost per KW. Now KW is, when you're talking about a 500 or 700 megawatt plant, a megawatt's 1,000 kilowatts. So we look at things on a cost per kW as a measuring tool, but you can see that we kept track of the telephone costs when we buy postage. Everything we did, we had to account for it. And when we got all said and done, we looked at it over a number of years. So in 2007, Utilities Rolling Along has had a good experience with energy efficiency program, and we found out that our cost for the programs is lower than what a new coal plant costs. Or you can look up at the other bar up here for a new nuclear plant. So if you're making a business decision for a utility standpoint, which program would you want? Or better yet, if your customers knew this, what programs would they expect you to put in place? So we're not going to do any conservation energy efficiency program, we're just going to go out and build a new plant. You guys do what you want. That's not necessarily the most responsible. Now when I show this slide, a lot of people say, Glenn, what happened in 2003? You were thinking that, weren't you? Well, we're pretty small. One full-time employee was working on these programs, and he retired, so we had to get somebody else in and train him. There was about a 5-6 month overlap, and that's the salaries for 2 employees going on, and that's why it shows up that way. So what that told me is when we did it, we were accurate in doing our thing. So how did we do some of these? Well, I'll tell you about some of the programs: washers, refrigerators, dishwashers, room air conditioners. We had rebate programs, and we would say, okay, you got to exceed what the federal standards are by 15 or 20%, and then these would qualify. And over a 15-year period, we found out that 90% of all of our residential customers had participated in one or more of our rebate programs. Now, if you weren't doing anything at all for the utility, then simply trying to have good customer relations, wouldn't you want to be able to get into 90% of those homes and help them lower their utility bill? If for no other reason, even if you thought all that climate change and everything was hocus pocus, that makes sense. Now, we also had a program in Waverly. The local Chamber of Commerce had what they call Waverly dollars. They're trying to encourage people to spend money locally. So we said, well, how could we help out? Is we only issued rebates in Waverly dollars. So customers didn't have any choice; they had to spend the money locally. So that worked out really well for us. Our main program for new residential construction was what we call a Good Sense residential program. The program has its history all the way back to the old days of selling heat pumps, and originated in Pensacola, Florida, with a company called Gulf Power. It's now part of the Southern Company. But it looks at the design of the home. Think about this. Which design, if you're looking down on a house, looking at the shape of a house, what design is going to have the least amount of wall exposure for square footage? It's not going to be a single wide mobile home, I can tell you that.
Dome.
Yeah, circle. A round house would have less wall exposure. So really what you would look for is boxy shaped. 2-story home's going to have less exposure than a 1-story home for square footage. So that goes into it. The orientation, I used to do a lot of energy audits back in my early days, and people would say, well, you guys are ripping me off, and the meter's gone haywire because it's just me and my wife here, and the family right across the street, same kind of house. And they got 4 kids, and the laundry's going all the time, doors are open, and and their bill's the same. So you guys are ripping me off. I said, how can that be? I said, no, you don't understand. You live on the wrong side of the street. And they said, what are you talking about? I said, no, look at your glass exposure. It's all east or west facing. You're getting a full brunt of the sun. That's adding like a ton worth of air conditioning load onto your house, where they don't. So you need to sell your house and move across the street. Anyway, orientation has a lot of thermal protections, basically insulation, weatherizations like weather stripping, caulking, those things. Equipment efficiency. Utility says, okay, to qualify for this program, you got to have very efficient heating and cooling system. The other thing, and this is the biggie, is equipment sizing. Heating and air conditioning contractors typically won't do what is called heat gain, heat loss calculations. They just simply either don't know or won't take the time to do it. And what happens is the residential customer ends up with usually a ton or more of bigger air conditioning system than they need. And we've proven that over the years. So we actually, utility would size heat and cool system. That takes a lot of time, a lot of work, and utilities don't particularly like hearing that they're going to do that. So these were all of the standards that we used. It doesn't really mean anything. You have to look at your local weather, but essentially we're saying you got to do that. Well, how do you get people to participate in that? You say, just throw it out there and say, we got a program. That's a lot of what's going on. We had one little catch in there, said, oh yeah, and by the way, if you build a home that way, and we certify it, we're going to give you a 10% rate discount for 10 years. Well, Waverly, Iowa is a German heritage community, and they're all frugal Germans, and every one of them will have that. We talked to home builders, heat and air contractors, said we're not having anything to do with your program. And then after about a few weeks of advertising and letting customers know what's going on, they said, well, wait a minute, this customer wants it, so we'll do it. Today, 95% of all new homes are participating in the program. In fact, the heating and cooling program, there's no units going in entire service territory that the utility doesn't size now. And that's a free service that the utility provides. So how do we deal with existing homes? I've already got a home out there. Well, your air conditioner fails. And what happens is the heat and air contractor comes by, serviceman says, you know, condemns it, your compressor died or whatever, unit's 15 years old, you need a new unit. Well, it's usually 110 in the shade, and they say, what are we going to do? And, well, can you fix it? Yeah, we can put a new one in. Well, they just happen to have a 3-ton in the back of the truck, and that's what goes in there, and it's more than they need. So what we did is said, wait a minute, we'll drop everything if that happens. You call us, we'll come out, we'll run the load calculation, we'll size it, and you put in the size and efficiency. We said we'll give the homeowner a $200 rebate. Then we have another little trick in there, is we'll give the serviceman that condemned the unit $50 rebate. And all of a sudden, those guys are on our side. Because, hey, I get $50 just for being a nice guy. We found out that on average, it was a ton and a ton and a half difference in the size of the unit that would have gone in the house. So not only can you build new houses right, you can go back out there and buy reduced load and reduced energy usage. Customers came back and told us, we go to them 6 months or a year later and say, how do you like the new system? Oh, it's so much better, it's quieter, it's more comfortable. Well, the reason it's more comfortable is smaller units get more dehumidification. It actually runs longer, but it's using less energy when it's running, so they get more dehumidification. They're more comfortable at a higher temperature than they would be. So that was kind of some of the tricks on the heat and air. Commercial industrial programs for us were very difficult because we didn't have a team of engineers to go out and work with those customers. So we made it real simple. Said if you reduce your peak load on our system, we'll pay you $300 a kilowatt, kW demand. And we had some real good success with that. A lot of big companies look at 2-year paybacks on any kind of investments, and including energy efficiency. If it doesn't meet that 2-year payback criteria, they won't do it. So we said we got to be more aggressive. There's more potential in energy efficiency really in the industrial and commercial sector areas and residential. The only problem with residential is you build a house and you know, the utility knows you're going to be serving that customer for at least another 50 years, if not the next 100 years. And you can't change the walls and the windows, things like that. Very difficult to change. So the end of the line is we looked at our program over a 15-year period. So what happened? You got to remember, Waverly is a small community. We only had 4,700 meters. So what was the bottom line from doing all of that stuff? Well, the net savings, now this is after, not gross savings, but the net savings for the utility was $1.5 million.
Over what time frame?
15 years. So we could have said, we could have given all the employees we could have divided up between about 27 employees of 1.5 million, which I would have thought would have been a good idea, but our board wouldn't approve that. So the other thing it did is we were looking at a new coal plant. There was a new coal plant being built in Iowa. We had done load forecasting. We had done all of our calculations. And in fact, the growth was a little bit higher than what we projected. But because of our energy efficiency program, we did not need the 5 megawatts we originally forecast. We only needed 3. So we bought 3. So the bottom line for us was we had 40% reduction in the need for new capacity based on our programs. Or the other thing we could have done is have 4 months of free electricity for all of our residential customers. Now that would have been a popular general manager, I can tell you. What are all these things have to do with our carbon footprint or our greenhouse gas emissions? There was a program called EIA 1605B, which is Energy Information Administration. It had a voluntary program where you could report your sources for generation, and then you can calculate out what the carbon is from that, and then what kind of reductions you had in your programs. And we had a number, including tree planting programs, those sorts of things. And this is what we looked like after we implemented those programs. So we were able to really reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and this was measured in tons of CO2 per megawatt hour used. Now, people are looking at this real close going, okay, Glenn, what happened in 2005? My buddy from Enron up there, we own 2 wind turbines out in the western part of Iowa. They were part of a Storm Lake project, and it was acquired by Enron Wind. Then Enron Wind went bankrupt. We couldn't get them to maintain the systems properly, so we ended up selling 2 wind turbines, and we're trying to replace those. It's very difficult for small utilities buying it. But I like to tell this story and brag a little bit on Waverly. Waverly Light and Power in 1991 investigated using wind energy. We did not have any utilities doing wind energy in Iowa. So we got a study done that says feasible. So through some grants, we were able to get a small wind turbine. We put it in, and we did that, and the state told us that it wouldn't work. Universities told us it wouldn't work. So, well, you may be right, but there's only one way to find out. So we're going to put one in. Well, it's a long time ago, back in '93 when that first unit went in. Today there's over $2 billion worth of wind turbines installed in Iowa, and another $1.5 billion ordered. The largest utility in the state is Mid-American Energy. It's owned by Warren Buffett, and they have a federal tax credit right now. And when you have vast amounts of money, tax credits are a nice thing, so I think that probably plays a little bit into it. But Mid-American is very aggressive about installing more wind energy, and all the utilities in the state are doing that. It's kind of amazing to see. You can go in some places and actually drive for 20 miles and just see wind turbines. So there's a vast amount. Now, Iowa is 3rd in the nation in installed wind capacity. It's like 10th in wind resource. The wind resources actually are very much better in Nebraska and the Dakotas, Wyoming, and Montana. There's enough wind energy capability, capacity in those areas to meet all the electric needs of the United States. It just can't be moved easily. And we've said in presentations where people have projections that we can use electrolyzers that create hydrogen, separate hydrogen out, and actually use hydrogen for our energy resource. It's all wind sourced. Problem is it costs a little bit more, so, and people don't want to pay that. So anyway, that's where we were. Now, one final step in energy conservation is price. It's not unlike gas for automobiles. If you go back, say 15 years ago, almost every utility had what were called declining block rates. The more I used, the cheaper it got. And they were basing that on their sales plan and everything else. Well, there's been an evolution. A lot of them now have gone to flat rates, so it doesn't matter. What we decided was that not only were our programs not good enough, we need to keep working on our programs, we need to send price signals out there as well. So what we did is we implemented what's called an inverted rate, and for the 3 summer months, actually 4 summer months, June through September, we implemented this rate structure where the more you use, the more expensive it gets. In fact, it's double when you get over 1,500 kilowatt hours. And we saw 2 things. One of them was some radical, very vocal comments about our rate design from some folks who were high users.
Residential?
No.
Commercial?
No, this is residential rate. No, this is not commercial. Commercial industrial actually has demand meter, and that gets into a whole deal. I can talk about it if you want me to, but we don't meter residential that way. It's simply how many miles you drove. That's how we measure in kilowatt hours. So we know though, and we talked to our board about this, you can justify this rate structure. And it's you to go over 1,500 kilowatt hours, it's double. And what it really is saying is that, remember the house I told you about our friends had? And then we've got Mrs. Jones down here living in a 1,200 square foot house. Her demand contribution to our system peak is way lower than this house. But we're charging everybody the same rate. Residential's all grouped together, but they're not the same, and there's a lot of differences going on now. So we said, okay, the more you use, then you're going to have a higher contribution to the system peak. So we actually ought to be charging you more. So that was the justification for this rate, and it worked. We actually saw reduction in kilowatt hour usage after we weather normalized everything for that first summer. But it was also a great opportunity for a general manager to retire, which he did. So anyway, this is my final slide. As I tell utilities, let's suppose that you don't believe that all of what we did in Waverly, Iowa was a good thing and it would work in your utility system, and Glenn's full of it. But there was a decent business case, and you knew that there was a fair business case out there, and it's really not going to cost the utility or their customers anymore, okay? And you really think Al Gore's a wingnut and all this climate change stuff's a bunch of hocus pocus. What if it turns out in the long run you were wrong? Why not do it anyway? So my recommendation to utility is have no regrets policy. I'm going to do it because I can justify the business case, and I'm going to do it because there's a chance that I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, when this thing's all said and done, it's going to be too late. So we need to take the initiative now. So I try to encourage utilities to adopt aggressive programming. A lot of utilities, and I'll be honest with you, I talked to them about a lot of utilities on paper or say they have all of these programs, but nobody's coming. You may not have the right incentives out there. You may not have the right workforce out there. And if you're not getting results, talk to other utilities that are getting results. Find out what are they doing. And this is an exact comparison. We were 14 miles away from Cedar Falls, Iowa. Cedar Falls, Iowa had the exact same Good Sense program we did. But their manager refused to have the rate incentive that we did. So we're getting all kind of participation. They're not. They were giving away a tree, a little tree. If you build a Good Sense home, that was their incentive. So nobody was doing anything. Throw 10% rate discount for 10 years out there, and now all of a sudden everybody's wanting to do it. So you can have the programs, but you may not. You got to have the incentives to match them. And there's a whole educational process. I'll tell one more story, and then I'm done. When we implemented, the very first program we implemented was appliance rebate for refrigerators. And we knew that new refrigerators were really a lot more efficient than the ones they were replacing, which is still true. You got to remember that in Iowa, we had 2 companies headquartered in Iowa then. One of them was Amana, and the other was Maytag. And both of them were manufacturing appliances in Iowa. So we go to a local dealer in Waverly, and they are an Amana and Maytag dealer. And we said, we want to do this appliance rebate program. And the first reaction was, get out of here. We don't want the utility telling us what to do. We don't want you involved in our business. I said, no, you don't understand. we've got to do this because it's the right thing to do for a whole lot of reasons, but we're going to do it, but we want you to participate with us. And they said, well, we'll take your stuff and look at it. So they called back the very next day and said, we can't do it. I said, why? Well, you gave us this list of the models that would qualify for the rebate, and we can't get them. I said, what do you mean you can't get them? They said, yeah, we've contacted our distribution folks at Maytag and Amana, and we can't get those units. And I said, why? They said, because they're manufactured for the California market. California would only allow them to ship those units in, because the state had said, okay, this is the minimum standard. I said, okay, give me the number. I'm going to talk to them. So I called Maytag and Amana, and it's the same thing. I said, my dealers tell me you don't do that. That's right, those are for the California market. And I said, okay, when I go to the press, my story is that Maytag and Amana, that Iowans are good enough to build these units and ship them to California, but they're not good enough to buy it. That's what you want me to tell the media. Hang on, let us call you back. So the local dealer called the next day and said, guess what? We can get the units. And forevermore, we were able to get the high efficient unit. But a lot of that kind of stuff goes on in the merchandising of it. But and the utility's got to be there. I mean, the dealer wasn't going to do it on his own because there's no incentive. And what the dealer figured out after about a month of selling the high-end refrigerators, that he could make more money. And the customers figured out that if they were getting a $100 rebate, that they could buy the high-efficient model cheaper than they could buy the other one. The dealer didn't even stock the low ones. Now you go in the store and anything but, like Energy Star has now come along, which is a good program. But heating and air contractors find that out. First of all, I said, well, wait a minute, you're talking, I could have sold them a 2.5 ton unit, now it's only a 2. I said, yeah, but you're selling the high-end model, and you get a higher markup on that high-end model. Oh, yeah. So there's ways of working with the trade allies out there that they can win from energy efficiency as well. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I didn't realize, naivete maybe, but I didn't realize that if Amana makes a refrigerator, that refrigerator can be bought in any place in the United States and will be sold, but that isn't true.
That's correct.
So my second question is, how can one in fact find out about that information? For instance, if now you've told me there's something in California that I can get, but can't get, let's say in Kentucky, where can I go or find out that information to get that?
Well, you probably would have to know some.
Gotcha.
How
about you?
There's a directory that's called ARI Directory, and it stands for Air Conditioning Refrigeration Institute. And what ARI Directory lists all these appliances and everything. Probably the best thing to do is now, what I'm telling you is kind of old history. Most of them have opened up. Energy Star has really kind of changed the ballgame for everybody.
Yes.
So if you look at Energy Star rating, you're going to be pretty safe. But I don't think they do as much of that anymore. This was probably 17 years ago when we did that. And California had legislated. They admit, say you cannot ship these old units in here anymore. It's got to meet this standard, or we're not going to do it. It's similar to CAFE standard for cars on gas mileage.
Yes.
That you've got to get this certain level before you can sell it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one comment on that, which was really frustrating as a renewable energy installer for a number of years, is that there's a lot of RE products that you just can't buy here in Kentucky, that you can buy in places like New Jersey, that you can buy in California, because the manufacturers are only selling to those markets because that's where the market's at. They've got the big sales, and it's just really frustrating because to be competing with low rates and high cost of equipment, it's just frustrating. My question to you is, how do you nail that net savings? Because that seems like it's a really key component. I'm thinking of Kentucky Utilities. Last spring they passed a $26 million DSM rate that they passed into their rate structure for all our customers combined. And yet you're telling me that you're saving money. So how do we analyze that savings and say, hey, why are, we pay 6.5 cents from KU, and yet when you take the DSM surcharge and all these other surcharges, it comes out to 8.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Why are we paying this extra rate if you're actually going to be making money doing this?
What's the name of the track here? We want Keeneland?
Yeah.
Kentucky Utilities.
You paying 6.5 cents, you ought to be going to Keelan every day and think, I got all this extra money. If I was living in New York or California, you'd be paying double that.
So, I mean, it comes out to 8.5 cents
seriously,
per kilowatt hour because of the
Yeah.
surcharges.
Seriously, what they do is utilities make a pretty convincing case. If I sell less, that's gonna reduce my income, which is true. So this is why it's a real hard sell. Great question. How do you do that? We had,
Are you a purchaser or generator as well?
both. Now, there's three broad categories of utilities. One is investor-owned utilities, which Kentucky Utilities is. And then there's electric cooperatives. And then there's what they call public power, which are municipally owned systems. Both the co-ops and the munis really are, they own the system and they don't have shareholders per se. So if the rates or the revenue went down or whatever, it doesn't matter. That's just part of doing the business. Kentucky Utilities got to answer shareholders. If they don't give a certain return, their stock goes in the tank and the CEO is going to be in big trouble. And that's part of the problem is how you do that. There's one way of doing it, it's called decoupling. You can take the rates for an energy efficiency out of the original rate design and say, okay, we're going to do this because it's the right thing to do. So you can separate those two. The sad part is that the head of Kentucky Utilities is going to probably live and die on next quarter's financial statement. If it's looking bad, he's toast. So you're going to have a real hard time convincing him that selling less of his product is a good thing to do. So this is where regulation comes in. This is the hard part about monopoly business, is that you've got to have very good regulators, whether it's a state public service commission or actually your customer base. Informed customers are the best source to make the changes. But it's a real challenge. Yes, sir.
Why isn't the California model applicable to all states? California's been basically saving energy for 3 decades, and I don't think they've built a coal-fired plant in that amount of time. They don't have any plan. So why can't this be applicable across the U.S.?
Well, they claim they're out in front on a lot of things, but everybody says they're wingnuts out there. So I do know a little bit about some of the truth behind that, and them not building a plant is really not accurate, because you can drive through Utah. It's sitting out in the middle of Utah. It's one of the largest coal-fired plants in the country, and it's got a DC transmission line straight into LA. So what they were doing was exporting their problem. They've got some serious problems in California, but California at the same time has been one of the most aggressive on energy efficiency. And their legislature has been really tough on setting standards. Why can't we do it? I don't know. Why, and we were talking about this at lunch, we have always rated utilities on their rates. And if you're a utility manager, you know that that's the standard by which everybody's judging you is what are your rates. And we ought not to be doing that. We ought to be saying, what are your customers' bills? I often said this, is rates don't count, bills do. And with my board, it was really a process of going through education. I said, what do you want? You want to have low rates, or do you want to have low usage and low bills? Well, you've got to think about that. So what we had to do, we did a survey, and we found out the average residential use for all the utilities surrounding Waverly, and their usage was higher. Because our programs were keeping usage down, our customers had lower bills, even though our rates were higher. So that's kind of an educational thing. There's a lot of issues, and you got to fight these old misconceptions and say, hey, we got to move on beyond it. I don't know. And talk about renewable energy, this reminded me, the board says, okay, we've got these programs in place. What would you do, Glenn, if you could do another level of being aggressive on energy efficiency? And I said, well, that's simple. I'll just change the building code. You either build it to standard or we don't serve you. If you don't think that energy efficiency is the right thing to do, then do your own. Why isn't every roof a solar collector? I mean, you know, all new construction going on, all these roofing jobs going on. If you started doing that, you'd see a couple of things happen. One of them, price of solar would probably go down. And all of a sudden you'd have everybody out there contributing back to the grid.